Welcome back, friends. Today we are going to pick up the claim that's become popular, especially online. Maybe you've heard it too. Jesus never existed. Now, I've been in plenty of conversations when someone throws out that line, and they think it ends the discussion.
Yeah.
It's like, Jesus never existed. Mic drop, conversation over. I don't know. What about you?
You know, it's if you've ever heard any one of my communion meditations, you know that I have a serious problem with going into comment sections on social media.
You and me both.
I know I shouldn't, and I do it all the time. I'll even tell myself as I'm, reading an article or looking at something on social media, and I'll be like, I really should just stay out of the comment section. But anyways, I have a problem with going into those comment sections, and I don't remember what the topic was, but somebody had made a comment that Jesus was a myth, and I replied with, "What's your evidence?" And his response was, "I don't need evidence. He was a myth." It's like, and I presented, that's not an exact quote, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but
right.
I responded with, some historical sources, and the only thing he would respond with was, Jesus was a myth. I give you historical sources, it's not good enough for you. There's people who, so here's we'll get into it as we dive into the argument, but yeah, people think that, well, I can just claim that he didn't exist, or I can just claim that he was a myth, and then that's it.
Which is really kind of fascinating when you think about it, because there are a lot of atheists, a lot of agnostics, a lot of very hostile people towards the Bible and towards the church that they're like, no, he was a real dude. He really existed. But the fact is, that's becoming very common. Yeah. People really do believe that. They really do argue that Jesus was a myth invented by first century Jews as a symbol of rebellion against Rome, stick it to the man, which is kind of funny that then Jewish literature of the day talks about the fact that they did not like this Jesus of Nazareth guy.
Yeah.
But, whatever have you. Others, I think I've heard people claim that he's some kind of folk hero, that his divinity was added later by power-hungry church leaders.
In the 3rd century when they were persecuted.
Yeah, because that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, in their defense, it does sound like a neat and tidy little argument, but the problem is the evidence doesn't back it up.
Yeah, it just doesn't hold water.
So speaking of evidence, Ryan, you know and I know that the Bible clearly talks about Jesus as a real person, about his divinity. Jesus makes some claims about himself, which we'll get into later in this episode. But I think it's important we look at the claim, we explain what they mean, and then we look at what does history tell us. Even before we touch the Bible, yes, the preacher just said that. So let's start by understanding the claim. What are some of the versions going around?
So one of them, we've kind of already mentioned both of them. One is that he was a completely mythological person,
okay,
that he never actually existed.
Okay.
Or that maybe kind of a variation of that is that the Jesus that we have recorded in the Bible was a conglomeration of several different Jewish revolutionaries in the 1st century.
Okay, so like a Simon the Zealot, or the Maccabees, or descendants of the Maccabees, or Barabbas, or okay.
Yeah.
And I think the other claim is that he was a teacher, he was a folk hero, and then like we talked about a minute ago, the stuff about his divinity wasn't added until the 3rd and 4th century, as you commented, prior to Emperor Constantine while the church was openly being persecuted.
Yeah. Or that Constantine is the one that added his divinity in this. I think
Right.
I like to imagine that people who believe that have this image of Constantine, sitting on a throne, rubbing his hands evilly, saying, "Let's make him a god," that kind of thing. And in reality,
Yeah, let's add to the just plethora of false gods we already have.
yeah. But I think that some of that is wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Some of it is just somebody puts a theory out, people like it because it's anti-Christian, and so they latch onto it and don't feel like they have to explain or justify their argument at all.
Well, and I think the other problem is that both of those, at their root, they run under the assumption that the Bible is the only source of evidence we have for who Jesus was. And I got a newsflash for you, folks. It's not. Yeah,
there's a lot of extra biblical sources just for the existence of. And keep in mind, that's what we're talking about right now is just the mere existence.
The historical man.
Right, the historical person of Jesus. And the majority of Bible scholars, the existence, his actual existence, isn't even a question.
Yeah.
He's one of the most well-attested first century people that modern historians have.
I would argue he's probably one of the most well-attested historical figures of antiquity as a whole.
Yeah.
There is no question that Jesus existed when you actually look at the historical evidence, when you actually look at documentation that comes not only a century or two after Christ's time, but even right around Christ's time.
Yeah.
I mean, some as we get ready to start going into this historical evidence, some of this is very close to the time of Christ's life. And it's important to note that it comes from the Jews, who by and large hated him. And it comes from Romans, who by and large hated the Jews and the Christians at that time frame.
Well, and they were honestly, in the beginning anyways, they were kind of ambivalent towards Christianity specifically.
Yeah.
They were just kind of like, ooh, hey, look, another religious sect in Rome.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Or another sect. Oh, look, another sect of Judaism. Woohoo.
Yeah. I mean, for them, it was a non-issue.
Yeah. Until it became an issue.
Yeah, until it became an issue. I heard an argument, or not an argument, but there was I think he was a historian who was talking about the percentage of the Roman world that were Christian. And one of the quotes that you kind of hear tossed around is that Christians made up like 10% of the population, which is a small. Roman world was
massive.
Yeah. And entailed a lot of people, and so 10% was really not that many. But he made the point that it was actually even less than that.
Oh wow!
That it was probably more on the order of like 1 to 2%.
So a minority of minorities.
Yeah, the minority of minority groups. And so, to think that this then rose to become the predominant religion in Rome, in the Roman world, is just incredible.
Yeah.
And just kind of before we kind of dive into this, little backstory and little inside baseball. The episodes that we're doing right now are based on an apologetic series that I taught last year.
Here at the church.
No, excuse me, 2 years ago almost.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
2024.
Here at the church.
And
it's 2026.
Yeah, it's 2026 now. It was almost
2024, yep.
Yeah, we started in April of 2024.
Yep.
And since that time, there's been other additional discoveries that push back the divinity of Christ, the claims of Christ's divinity, all the way back to, I think it was within 20 years.
Yeah.
The floor, the fresco that was found in Guido, under a prison,
yep.
that claimed Christ to be to be God.
We should know for the viewers and the listeners that when we talk about evidence for Jesus' deity, we are talking evidence outside of the scripture.
Right.
We are talking historical, archaeological evidence, not manuscripts, not biblical manuscripts and evidence. We're talking things outside of the Bible.
Yeah, in some cases. Yeah,
in some cases, at least right now, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, but that goes again. That goes to the kind of response to the claim that one, that he never existed. Well, within 20 years of his death and resurrection. We'll put resurrection in
we'll put that in quotations for now.
Just to be generous to the skeptic out there. You know, we understand that maybe that's kind of a contested claim. I get it. I mean, I think there's good reasons to believe it, but we'll dive into that at another point maybe. But you know, to see that there's physical evidence of Jesus being worshipped as God, which there's your response for Jehovah's Witness.
Yep. 20 years after his death.
Yeah. Within 20 years.
Which means, you're talking, he died in 30 AD, 33 at the latest. You're talking by 53 AD, Christians were confident enough and assertive enough in the worship that they were willing to make tile designs stating that fact. But you know what? You said you wanted to straw man the skeptic. I agree with you. So strong man. Sorry, boy, I cannot talk today. It's about as bad as the last episode.
Yeah, carry over from last time.
But yeah, we want to strong man the skeptic. So one of the things they're going to say is you can't use the Bible because it's biased. Our response to that would be that's like saying you can't use eyewitness testimony because the eyewitness has an opinion. We're going to disagree with you, but for the sake of discussion, for the sake of apologetics, for the sake of communication, we will concede that point for now.
I wouldn't say concede it.
The use of the Bible for now. Not talking. Okay. Not talking that it's not as valid eyewitness testimony, but we'll concede the point of not using it for now. But we don't actually have to.
No,
that's the thing.
We have very early attestation to at the bare minimum, Jesus' existence.
Yeah, at the bare minimum. So, what are some of the historical references that we have to Jesus Christ? And by the way, we are going to bring receipts. We are going to bring dates, and you're going to notice that contrary to skeptic claims, some of these are very close to the time of Christ or close to the time of his apostles.
Yeah. Or early church.
Or not early church, apostolic fathers. So before we get into historical, let me give you this breakdown. You have Jesus Christ, you then have the apostles, you then have the apostolic fathers, and then you have the early church fathers.
Right.
Early church fathers would be somebody like Augustine. So you're talking 300 to 400 AD. Prior to Augustine, you have people like Clement of Rome or Ignatius. Those would be considered apostolic fathers because they were direct disciples of the apostles themselves. So just kind of keep that in mind.
And some of these sources are not even, well, they're not even Christians.
No, they're not, but I'm just laying out the time frame.
Oh, gotcha.
So how close we are. You're talking basically some of these later ones that we're going to talk about are within what we would call two generations of Christ, from Christ, in terms of the church. So historically, this is a very narrow time frame.
It is. And that's one of the things that works against the idea that this is all mythology.
Right.
Myths don't develop within the lifetime of the people that originated the story.
Correct.
As actual, the people who study mythology understand it and how they define it, within 10, 20, 30 years, really within 50 years or even 100 years, that's not enough time for things to have become mythological,
right.
Mythology, myths to develop.
And the other thing to take in mind is We're talking of cultures that, while yes, they had written history, they still were very much oral tradition histories. And so they would have been meticulous about how they orally communicated things as well as how they wrote things down.
Right. And that's kind of one of the fascinating things about oral cultures is that, we live in a culture where the written word tends to carry more weight than the spoken word.
Correct.
Well, in the ancient world, I don't know that it was necessarily completely different, but we take great care to transfer, if we're copying information from one page to another,
right,
we take exceeding care to create as accurate a copy of that written word onto the page as we possibly can.
Right.
And in oral cultures, they do the same thing. In fact, it was Socrates who had a problem with people creating scrolls, because he believed that it would cause the downfall of memorization, that people wouldn't be able to memorize anything anymore, that they wouldn't be able to recite material from memory.
He wasn't necessarily wrong, folks.
He wasn't necessarily wrong, but it's a change in technology.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the people who are opposed to, going to using computers as opposed to using, writing by hand.
Yeah.
They were opposed to that advance in technology. Well, Socrates was no different.
Yeah.
And the first century was still, first century Judea was very much like you said, very much an oral culture, and they take great care to make sure that they are transmitting, this oral history and these oral stories.
Yep.
As accurately as we worry about transferring written information.
So let's go ahead and dive into some of these historical evidences. Now, we're not going to go in chronological order. We're just going to kind of reference them, but we will give you the dates. So hopefully that will help, at least the year. So
first off, we have Tacitus, who's writing around 116 AD.
Okay, so that'll be shortly after the Apostle John.
Right. Within, 20 years?
Within 20 years of his death.
Well, almost 30 years. I think he died in early 90s?
97, I think.
Is that when it was?
Yeah.
Okay, so it would be about 20 years. But Tacitus was a Roman historian and who is respected for his accuracy. In his annals, he wrote, Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilatus is actually the quote.
Right.
So now Tacitus wasn't a Christian.
No.
He was a pagan Roman. And he was known for calling Christianity a mischievous superstition. But what makes this powerful is that we have not only a direct reference to Christ, to Jesus, from a hostile source.
Right.
We also have mention of Pontius Pilate.
Right.
From a source that would have been friendly to Pilate.
Yep.
So, this hostile witnesses don't make up details about the people that they are hostile.
No.
Let me rephrase that.
They don't make up factual details about people they're hostile to. They will make up infamous details.
Yes.
By the way, I don't want to. Hopefully, this doesn't steal too much thunder. I was actually reading an article that came out, an archaeological article, and it talks about the accuracy of the Gospel of Luke, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things they found out is here that actually Tacitus makes a mistake in his recording.
I've heard this.
Yeah. Where he calls Pilate or procurator instead of what was it? How does Luke call him? Pontius Pilate, governor? Or?
What is it? He calls him a procurator.
Actually,
his
I could just
title.
I could just turn over to.
Yeah.
But it was just interesting that this archaeological thing, it talks about the fact that Luke actually calls Pilate correctly. I should have made sure I had my ducks in a row before I tried to mention this.
Well, it just, as these things come up in the course of conversation, I want to look at the Greek word. What chapter are you in?
I think it's Luke 23, but don't quote me on
I'm
that.
going to quote you on it. I know, this is so incredibly boring.
I'm so sorry, folks. I really should have had.
Maybe we can just edit this edit this out in post.
You're asking a lot. But no, it was some way that Luke referred to him.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I just heard the same thing from one of the podcasts I listened to. Just discuss that same topic.
Yeah, but it was like he was either referenced as a governor or I don't remember. But the thing about it was they were talking about the fact that it was a testimony to how accurate Luke was in his research, and that's not to say that discredits Tacitus at all, but rather just kind of points to the fact that Luke was extremely accurate in his recording of things as well.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'll have to find it and I'll post it into the description of this video, because I remember it was something that Luke said, and maybe it wasn't Pilate. I'm pretty sure it was Pilate, but anyway, the reference to Pilate, the gospel writer uses a different term than what Tacitus uses, and they said that actually was the proper title for Pilate, not procurator. But it's not to say that this is inaccurate. People make mistakes, but it's interesting that here somebody like Ryan said, who was hostile to Christianity, hostile to the Christian faith, said, "Yeah, no, he was a real dude."
Yeah. Because
remember, the story that the Jews had circulated was that Jesus' disciples came and stole the body. Well, if he wanted to be inaccurate intentionally, he could have slipped this into this quote, into this discussion, but he doesn't.
No. Well, it's not his purpose in writing.
Well, agreed.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is if he had been wanting to be super hostile and intellectually dishonest, he could have.
Yeah, and I think that kind of like we mentioned before, is the Romans were by and large relatively ambivalent.
Yeah.
Towards Christ and towards Christians in general in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of evidence of that is that he gets a mention, but to him it's it's trouble in a backwater province of the Roman world.
Yeah.
It didn't really matter to him.
Yeah, that's fair. So who else we have?
We've got, and hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, Thallus.
Okay.
Who I believe wrote around 52 AD. Now, his writings the original writings are lost.
Right.
However, he's quoted later by Julius Africanus.
Okay.
And Thallus was trying to explain the darkness that occurred at Christ's crucifixion, and he was trying to explain, it as an eclipse or something along those lines.
So he was trying to dismiss Christianity. He's trying to dismiss the gospel account of the sky turning dark.
Right. But in what's funny is that in doing so, all he did was confirm that it actually happened.
Oops.
Whoopsie. Now, maybe it was an eclipse. My understanding of astronomy is that there was no eclipse that would have occurred during that time, particularly one that lasted for
3 hours.
3 hours. I don't know of any eclipse.
Well, especially one. Maybe you noticed, maybe not. Was Thales in Rome, or was he in the Mediterranean?
I don't know. I think he was in. I don't recall. I keep wanting to say that he was in Africa at the time.
But eclipses themselves, though, they have a narrow, especially a solar eclipse, has a narrow viewing band where it's complete darkness. Mm-hmm. So that even makes it more interesting, because if he was outside that narrow band, then he's got a lot more explaining to try to come up with.
Yeah. But the point of the matter is that he's just verifying that there was darkness. Now, was it maybe an eclipse of some type? Maybe there is a natural explanation. The supernatural part of it isn't necessarily that there was an eclipse; it's that it occurred at the time that it did. So, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, and then we have Pliny the Younger. Mm-hmm. I believe that's 2nd century?
Early 2nd century.
Early 2nd century. And he was a Roman governor. And I think he was writing to Emperor Trajan, and he describes Christians worshiping Christ as a god.
Right.
And I think that's interesting, because he's not debating their theology. He's simply reporting something he observed.
Yeah.
He's going, hey, this is what I saw. And that's direct evidence of early Christian belief in the deity of Jesus Christ. 2nd century, early 2nd century, for those of you who don't know how these work, if it's 2nd century, that means it's between 100 AD and 200 AD.
199.
Common error.
No.
AD for us, common error for the skeptics.
If you ask,
I'm going to try to strongman them.
If you ask, who was it? One of the physicists that has a quote that he continues to use AD and BC because that was created by the most accurate calendar that we have to date, and so he'll continue to use AD and BC.
Well, I remember just kind of as a joke. I remember one skeptic was like, "Well, why don't you?" Because I remember another skeptic was like, "Well, why do you use AD in BC?" He goes, "Well, what was the common era?
Yeah.
What was the common denominator?" And the person's like, "Well, the Christians believe the birth of Christ." He goes, "Exactly, and that's how we got our calendar. So,
yeah,
might as well go with it." But he cites direct evidence that he saw Christians worshiping Christ as God.
Right.
So, and you're talking somebody, again, between 100 to 199.
Well, he was, Pliny the Younger was, I have in my notes here, he was 61 AD to 113 AD.
Right.
So he would have been late 1st century, early 2nd.
Okay, so there you go. That's really close to the time of Christ.
I think this particular writing that we're referring to here did occur in the early 2nd century. However, he was,
again, that's you're talking around the time of Tacitus. So, and then there's Josephus, the Jewish historian, who was about, I think, 37 to 101 AD, really close. Like, he would have grown up hearing stories of the stuff that took place in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He was a Jewish historian who mentions Jesus twice in his book Antiquities. Now, there is some debate by scholars whether Christian scribes embellished parts of the description, but the overall consensus is that he did refer to Jesus as a real person executed, again, under Pilate.
Yeah, we have another reference to Pontius Pilate in Josephus. And, I think the general consensus now is there's really not much of a debate about whether some of the stuff that Josephus refers to about Jesus, I should have grabbed our copy of Josephus so I could read it. But it's not even really debated now that was added by later Christian translators or scholars. And there's some debate whether it was changed intentionally or whether it was, more of like a scribal note.
Right.
Because it says Jesus, who is called the Christ, if it be right to call him a man.
Right.
And that's the part that they kind of debate whether, was this intentionally added.
Right.
And in fact, I take that back. There was a scholar I was listening to not long ago who had said that there was some evidence that he may have actually written that may have been in his original writings. But again, it's,
Well, it could be one of those things that may have been in his original manuscripts, may have been edited out, and then a scribe who may have saw one of the originals may have added it back in and go, now, wait a minute, this was in there originally.
Yeah.
Why did it get taken out?
And that happens in early manuscripts.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
They'll harmonize, or they'll remember something from another manuscript and add it in there, and so there's a little bit of that crossover. But there again, regardless of what he actually says, there is an acknowledgement of Jesus's existence in the first century.
Yeah.
And Josephus would have been writing his antiquities of the Jews in the first century.
Yeah.
He was writing it to, I believe it was I don't remember who was the Caesar at the time, but he was writing it to the Roman authorities to explain kind of Jewish history and who these people, the Jews, are.
Yeah.
So there's that. But we've also got to give another Jewish reference. You've got Mara bar Serapion. Now I don't have really anything on what he's written other than just that he wrote that he mentions Christ and he mentions Jesus. But you have Suetonius, Lucian of Samosata,
and these guys were not sympathetic to Christianity.
No, not at all.
But they do mention Jesus, and they mention early Christians. And then perhaps the latest dated one that we're going to share with you, at least right now, is the Jewish Talmud itself. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're talking 500 to 700 AD. And one of the fascinating things about this is the Talmud is a Jewish commentary, and it's often very hostile to Christianity.
Very.
Yet it records, quote, on the eve of Passover, Jesus was hanged. Now, they do go on to accuse him of sorcery and leading Israel astray.
I actually have that full quote here.
Do you?
Yeah. On the eve of the Passover, Jesus was hanged. 40 days before the execution, a herald went forth and cried, "He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy." Now, there's a couple of things about this quote. If you remember in Scripture, there's talk when Jesus is at the temple of the Pharisees want to stone him.
Right. Yep.
Here's a reference to an authority, a herald. I know a herald would have been a court authority.
Yep.
Saying we're going to stone Jesus. And then on top of that, they want to stone him because why?
Because of sorcery, which means they're confirming he was working miracles.
He was doing things that they couldn't explain.
And for leading Israel astray, which means he was teaching something contrary to what the Pharisees and Sadducees were teaching. Or at least something that robbed them of their position and their authority. Mm-hmm. Notice, though, it doesn't deny that he existed.
Yeah.
It acknowledges he existed. And if anyone had a reason to erase Jesus from history, it was the Jewish rabbis. Yeah. And yet they didn't.
Yeah.
Instead, they acknowledge him.
Yeah, they acknowledge his existence, which, it just makes no sense. So this claim that Jesus never even existed, really only came about in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So it's only about 200 years old, maybe not even that, 150 to 200 years old. This claim that he never existed. The early Jews would have claimed that he was killed, and then the disciples stole the body.
Yeah.
Which
the Gospels actually tell us that was their claim. In fact, I believe it might be either Matthew or John. It actually says that the Jews still circulate this story to this day, meaning at the time that the Gospel writer is writing his account of Jesus' life, death, burial, and resurrection, the Jews were still circulating the disciples came and stole the body.
Yeah, which we could do an entire.
That probably will be. It's an own episode.
I'm sure it'll be its whole episode. But you could do an entire podcast on just that claim.
Yeah. Or you can read a book. It's called The Case for Christ.
Yeah. Or Cold Case Christianity.
Yeah, that's another good one.
J. Warner Wallace.
But if you take all of these things together, all these non-biblical sources, they create a strong case.
Super strong.
He lived. He gathered followers. He was crucified under Pilate. Pilate existed. And his followers came to worship him as God. Mm-hmm. So historically, there is no question based upon the evidence that Jesus Christ existed, that Christians came to worship him as God, that he amassed a following, and that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. History, both as recorded in the Bible and outside of the Bible, certify that Jesus existed. But let's take it a step further. Even if he existed, so let's say that we've won the skeptic over. All right, fine. Yeah, he existed. History definitely tells us that he existed. Okay, I concede your point.
Yep.
But he never claimed to be God.
Now let's just keep shifting that goalpost.
That's what we're doing. So you remember earlier when I said for the sake of argument, we would concede the point about using the Bible. Okay, well, skeptics, we've provided historical evidence that Jesus was a real person. You've shifted the goalpost. So guess what? Now I'm no longer going to concede that point of using the Bible, because the Bible gives us a historically accurate record of Jesus' words. So let's see what the man himself said.
So what did he say?
Well, let's test some of the things that he did. Let's test some of the things that he said. We know that according to the scripture, he healed people and he received worship. Matthew chapter 8 records a leper kneeling before Jesus, calling him Lord. The Greek word there is kurios. It is a word that means Lord. Now, before you get your skeptical belt too tight here, hear me out on this. The Old Testament used the word Adonai by the Jews, but the word in Hebrew is Yahweh, Yah-ah-weh-eh-weh. And what was used in the Greek Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, they just used the Greek word kurios. So when the New Testament refers to Christ as Lord using the word kurios, it's in the tradition of the Greek Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. So, I know that's not in the notes, but that's an important one to explain. So when the leper kneels down, a sign of homage and respect, and calls Jesus Lord, he is referencing kurios in reference to the Old Testament covenantal name. So he heals the man and he accepts worship. He does not tell the man to stop. Prophets, when they healed people in the Old Testament, told people not to worship them. Angels, with the exception of one in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord, that's a whole episode in itself, do not accept worship.
Yeah.
Here Jesus heals the man and accepts worship. In Matthew chapter 12, he claims to have authority over the Sabbath. He declares that the Son of Man, by the way, that's a term that comes from the book of Daniel, which references the one coming on the throne by the Ancient of Days, the Son of Man, is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is claiming that he has divine authority, again, that word kurios, over the Sabbath. Well, who instituted the Sabbath, Ryan?
That was Peter, wasn't it?
No.
Oh, it was God.
Yeah, it was God in the Ten Commandments.
6 days shall you work,
Seventh shall you rest. The seventh day is holy unto the Lord thy God.
Mm-hmm.
Fourth commandment, folks.
Yeah.
So, Jesus claims authority over the Sabbath. Jesus also forgave sins. And this is one I think goes, honestly, under the radar a lot.
Yeah.
In Matthew 9, along with several other places, he forgives the paralytic man's sins. The religious leaders instantly recognize that as a divine claim to authority because only God can forgive sins. And I love the way in which Jesus handles that. He goes, what's easier to say? Pick up your mat and walk, or your sins are forgiven.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's that instance. That's amazing. But he claims equality with God, with the Father. In John 12:45, he says, whoever sees me sees him who sent me. And then in Matthew 11:27, he claims exclusive knowledge of the Father.
Yep. And then there's the direct I am claims. At his trial, when asked if he is the Messiah, he responds with simply, I am. By the way, Jews would go to great lengths to avoid saying I am in any language. Interestingly enough, the Jews picked that up instantly as blasphemy. But that's not the first time that Jesus does that. When Jesus is dealing with the religious leaders, he talks about the fact that Abraham rejoiced to see his day. And they go, how do you're not even 40 years old. How do you claim to know Abraham? And Jesus makes a statement. Before Abraham was, ego amai, I am. And they instantly knew what he was claiming. They instantly knew that he was claiming that he was Yahweh. Yeah. And they picked up stones and they were ready to kill him.
And at his trial, when he responds to I think it was it Caiaphas or Annas, but when he responds with I am, that's why he tore his robe.
Yeah.
Because he recognized that he's claiming the divine name of God.
Yeah, he's claiming to be Yahweh. He's claiming to be God. And that's the important thing about this. You know, a lot of skeptics, they want to say that Jesus never claimed to be divine. That's simply not true. He calls himself I am. He says the Father and I are one. He says he who has seen me has seen the Father. He works miracles, and he says that if you don't believe me, believe the miracles. And through it all, he also, in the Gospel of John, 7 times says, I am. I am the good shepherd. I am the door. I am the gate. I am the bread of life. I am the living water. He makes all these I am statements, and when we read those in English, we just go, oh, he says I am the shepherd. What he's literally saying is, I am Yahweh, the good shepherd. I am Yahweh, the door. I am Yahweh, the bread of life. He's literally making a divine claim every single time he does those I am statements. Yeah. We don't get that in English because that's not how we talk.
It doesn't carry the same significance. That's a cultural thing.
It is a cultural thing.
It doesn't carry the same. You know, we can blaspheme God by using his name inappropriately. However, to just say God's name is not. There's no real taboo other than using it inappropriately. I mean, there is an inappropriate way.
Well, it's to use it. The blasphemy, using God's name in vain, is to misuse it, to use it flippantly, and to use it vacated of its holiness. Now, for you and I in English to say I am, that's not misusing God's name. Right. Because in English, it carries a different connotation.
Different meaning,
But if I were to go around and just say Yahweh all the time, flippantly, without reverence or anything like that, that would be misusing God's name. But here, Jesus is intentionally in the confines of both the Hebrew and Greek culture, using this statement of ego amai to prove a point, and he does so beautifully. But with all that said, it's important, friends, that we understand that these claims of Jesus' divinity were not later inventions. Jesus himself, as recorded in the Gospels, which are very close to his life here on earth, he very clearly makes divine claims.
Yep.
He was not executed because he was a nice teacher. He was crucified on the behalf of the Jews because he claimed to be Yahweh. He claimed to be God, and the religious leaders knew it. They had a lot of other reasons why they wanted him dead. But according to Jewish law, this gave them the reason. So that brings us to the next part. What do you do with it? Jesus clearly claimed to be God. So
Well, I think you only have three options.
okay.
One, he was a liar. Okay, I don't think he knew he was. Okay, so under this one, he knew he wasn't God, but he said it anyways.
Right, which then would make him a deceiver,
Right,
which would ruin the fact that a lot of religions try to say he's a good moral teacher.
right, and that also would refute the Muslim claim that he was just a prophet.
Right,
Because-
liars can't be prophets.
Right. So that goes against that one. Option number two is that he's a lunatic. He was deluded. He sincerely believed he was God, even though he was not. And that would put him kind of on par with someone claiming to be a poached egg. Kind of scrambled up top.
Right.
But that's not really the foundation of a good faith, of a religion.
No, and if he was a lunatic, then that would mean that his disciples had to suffer from the same kind of mental psychosis.
Right.
Because they were willing to die for what they believed about him. Mm-hmm. And newsflash, they did not. Those who were martyred, they did not die pleasant deaths.
No. And that's kind of the other thing is like, we can, yes, there are examples of people who, you think about Jonestown, you think about David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. There are people who are convinced by people who are, frankly, lunatics.
Right.
However, once those people died, did their movement continue on?
No.
No. What happened with Christianity?
It continued on. It flourished. It grew. In fact, actually, the apostles themselves, when they're facing trial in Jerusalem because of doing teaching and preaching and healing in Jesus' name, the Sanhedrin basically tell them, "Hey, shut up. We don't. You're not allowed to teach anymore in the name of Jesus. You're not allowed to do anything in the name of Jesus." And one of the Sanhedrin goes, if this is of God, we really can't stop it.
Right.
If it's not of God and it's of man, like we think that it is, once these guys die out, it'll pass and move on.
And the reason he said that is because Jesus wasn't the first person to claim to be the Messiah.
No, there have been several other during the period of the Maccabean revolt and during the intertestamental period that claimed to be the Messiah to save Israel, and everything went.
Yeah. Once they died,
Or
their
murdered.
movement died out with them.
Yeah. That did not happen with Christ, though.
But so there's something different about that.
Exactly.
Which takes us to our third possibility, and that he is the Lord. Mm-hmm. That what he said was true.
Yeah, he was who he said he was.
Yeah. And so those are the three options that we have. He's either a liar, he's a lunatic, or he's the Lord.
And I noticed what's missing. There was no option for him just to be a good man,
Yep.
just to be a wise teacher,
Just a prophet.
just a prophet. He himself did not leave that door open.
No, it's almost like he knew that these claims were going to come up later.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did.
And
so we have.
if option three is true, then
we know he did.
He did, yeah.
And so we're left with the fact that his claims force us to decide. He's either a liar, he's a lunatic, or he's Lord. And clearly, from our estimation, the evidence points to, both historically and biblically, that he is Lord. But we have one more piece of evidence we want to give you, that we want to really kind of focus on, and it's the resurrection.
Yeah, we want to touch on the resurrection.
Because if he's Lord, the resurrection is pretty strong, in my mind, evidence for it. So most scholars, even non-Christian ones, agree on 4 minimal facts.
Right.
We kind of talked about them already. We've seen them historically. Jesus was crucified and buried. There's no debating that. That is historical fact. The tomb was found empty.
By a group of his female followers.
Do not miss that. That is huge. Because in the ancient world, a female's testimony was absolutely worthless.
Yeah, they wouldn't. In order, they had a formula for allowing a woman to testify, and I think it was you had to have at least, if a woman's testimony was to be used, it had to be accompanied by either, I believe it was a male witness as well, or maybe it was 2 women, I can't remember, but they had a formula for being able to use a woman's testimony, and it basically had to have a male counterpart to say, yes, this is what she saw.
Or a sufficient number of women, probably to get around the with 3 or more witnesses, a matter is factualized, stated, or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was probably to get around that. But for God to use women in the first century as the initial finders of the empty tomb,
you wouldn't, if you were making this up,
you would not have done that.
You wouldn't have done that. You wouldn't have done that all the way up until probably maybe the 1500s?
I would push it even closer to our time.
Because women, unfortunately, just weren't viewed as reliable witnesses.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have done that in the ancient world.
And no, we're not saying that is the actual factual case. We're just saying that is the culture and the tradition of those time frames. So if you were lying and making this stuff up, you would not have said, hey, with the women. You wouldn't have done that. You would have talked about the men. Mm-hmm. Then there's the post-resurrection appearances. They're reported by individuals and groups. And I love the fact that in 1 Corinthians, Paul gives us kind of a list, saying that by the time that he wrote 1 Corinthians, there were 500 people that had seen Christ, and most of them were still alive. That's basically Paul saying, here's the receipt. You can go find these people and ask them yourself.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yep.
The other thing is his disciples, and really the disciples that came after them, were all radically transformed, and they were willing to die for their belief.
Right. If you compare, I think the best way to think about this is to compare the disciples at the arrest of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then the disciples following Christ's resurrection and ascension 40 days later.
Yeah.
So in the Garden of Gethsemane, what do the disciples do when
they run like a bunch of cowards?
They run like some chickens, and they take off. With the exception of was it Peter that struck the?
Peter struck Malchus's ear, and then once Jesus told him, "Put your sword away, because those who live by the sword will die by the sword." Then Peter took off, but Peter didn't take off and run away. He kind of ran out of eyesight and then followed behind John. Mm-hmm. To the high priest's palace, but everybody else took off. And actually, Mark, the writer of the Gospel of Mark, his name is John Mark, he was present in the Garden of Gethsemane, and one of the guards grabbed his outer cloak, and he actually took off butt naked, running away. But later, this same John Mark is the one who's going around with Peter, recording Peter's sermons, and will also serve with Paul after Paul's and his relationship is restored. Because even when Paul first meets him, he's kind of a coward. But eventually, that relationship is restored, and John Mark will become one of the gospel writers. Mm-hmm. So there's in itself a transformation.
Yeah. But all of them, even though Peter, initially struck Malchus with a sword, he still takes off. He takes his opportunity to be like, okay, deuces, I'm out.
Yeah, and then later denies Christ 3 times.
Right. But then something happens which radically transforms not just Peter, but all of the disciples. And they are willing to not only publicly proclaim, which they were willing to do that while Christ was alive.
Yeah.
But they're willing to face arrest,
persecution,
death.
Yeah.
And even though there's some debate about whether, how many of the disciples were martyred versus, how many died natural deaths.
Yeah.
Whatever. Even if it's just 2, even if it's just 1, that's still a radical enough change. They were all willing to face that certainty.
Yeah, and if church tradition is true, I know, because this does come from a lot of the Roman Catholic Church tradition, but the only one that died of natural causes was John. We actually know historically from tradition with pretty high degree of certainty that Peter and Paul were martyred basically side by side. Paul was beheaded and Peter was crucified upside down because Peter refused to be crucified in the same manner in which Christ was crucified. Okay, that was about 68 AD, so that was prior to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. James, we know for a fact, James, the brother of John, was thrown off the top of the temple.
That's recorded. That's also recorded, I believe, in Josephus.
Yeah, I believe it's also recorded or hinted at in the book of Acts. He was thrown off the temple by the religious leaders. So we know of at least one apostle biblically that was martyred. Pretty safe bet that Peter and Paul were martyred. Peter, because Christ tells him he's going to be martyred. Paul, because Paul is expecting to die. As Paul's writing to Timothy and Titus, he says, "Hey, bring me my coat, bring me my stuff, bring me John Mark, bring me because Paul is trying to tie up the loose ends before he dies."
Right.
So he knows it's coming.
Yeah, he knows it's on its way.
But as Ryan said, these are radically different. They went from running away like a bunch of cowards to being willing to be martyred for their faith. Most people will not be willing to die for something that they know is a lie.
Yeah. Now, people are willing to die for things that they believe to be true.
Right.
But not things that they know are not true.
Correct.
That's the fundamental thing to remember.
Yeah.
That if the disciples had...
If they had stolen the body. They would know that Christ's resurrection was a lie. Yeah.
And yet they were willing to go to their deaths.
There's actually a really funny video, I think it's on Facebook or YouTube, where it's actually the disciples and they're talking about this elaborate plan. Oh. And it's made in satire. And Peter goes, "Guys, I've got this great idea." They're like, "All right, Jesus died." And they're like, "Yeah, we know." He goes, "So we're going to go steal the body. Then we're going to pretend that he rose from the dead. We're going to share the gospel. We're not going to make any money. And then we're going to die." And all the guys were looking at him like, "What?" Like just this complete disbelief.
Yeah.
That is the kind of nonsense that we would have to say the apostles were like if Jesus did not actually resurrect from the dead. If they did steal the body and they knew it was a lie, that's the kind of idiocracy that would be what we would be claiming of them. And I'm sorry. I think that's a straw man argument against the resurrection.
Well, and here's the other thing too, though, is that keep in mind that the disciples were all good Jewish believers.
Yeah.
That, Jesus was executed on the eve of Passover.
Yeah.
And so that means that the next day would have been a high holy day.
Yeah.
So, and what was it? He was executed on Friday.
He was executed on Friday. The Passover Sabbath would have started Friday night at dusk.
Right. And so, Sabbath would have been the next day.
Yeah, and which is why the lays don't go to the tomb until early Sunday morning, because then the Sabbath is over, and then they can continue to work.
Now, what good Jewish first century believer would go and make themselves ritually impure, ritually unclean,
They wouldn't.
On the Sabbath.
They wouldn't.
Or before the Sabbath.
They
Or
wouldn't.
before the high holy day of
They
Passover.
wouldn't.
They wouldn't have. They would not have done that.
No. It would not have even crossed their minds.
No, it would have been completely anathema to them.
Yeah. And I know there are some skeptics that have said, well, they just went Saturday night after dusk. Let's be realistic. The disciples are not going to try to engage highly trained Roman infantry. Mm-hmm. You're just not. Because here's a newsflash for you. I don't know what you know about history. If you failed at your job as a Roman guard to guard something you were placed in charge of, the penalty of your failure was death.
Yep.
Whether that was a prisoner or a tomb or something the emperor put you in charge of, if you failed at your job, your life was forfeit unless the emperor or the governor was lenient or somebody interceded and paid your price for you.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, newsflash, that's exactly what the religious leaders say that they're going to do when they say, if the governor hears of it, we'll take care of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was them saying, hey, we will pay because there was actually a price you could pay to absolve a guard if you were a third party that was not responsible. It's really weird. Basically, Rome, as long as Rome got money out of it, they didn't care.
Yeah.
But all of these alternatives that are offered, they fall short.
Yeah, hallucinations don't happen. Groups don't hallucinate.
No, and even if they were to take something that would cause everybody to hallucinate, they're not going to have the same hallucination.
Right.
Number two, the wrong tomb theory collapses under scrutiny because the tomb was sealed, the tomb was guarded, and more importantly, Joseph of Arimathea came to Pilate and offered his tomb.
It was known publicly where he was buried.
Everybody knew where he was going.
Yeah.
Conspiracies don't hold when the conspirators are tortured and executed. Again, people will not suffer and die for something they know to be a lie. They may suffer and die for something they believe to be true, but not for something they know to be a lie. If the disciples took the body out and moved it, they would not have been willing to die for it.
Yeah, and that leaves us with the resurrection being the best explanation for the evidence that we have.
Yeah, 100%. And if the resurrection happened, then Jesus is exactly who he claimed to be, because he himself said, the Son of Man must be handed over and betrayed to sinful men. He will be crucified, buried, and rise on the third day. Jesus himself made that.
Checked all the boxes.
Yep, he made that proclamation. So Ryan, how do we use this?
Well, I think when someone says, oh, Jesus never existed, there's a simple way to respond. Number one, point to history. You don't have to memorize the quotes. If you can memorize them, great.
Yeah.
But, I don't have them memorized, but I know that he's mentioned by Tacitus and Josephus and the Jewish Talmud.
And even if you don't know all of the ones we've mentioned, if you know those three, that's huge. Because, really all three of them, to some degree, have some form of hostility towards Christianity or some reason not to be genuine about their relay of what Christ, of who Christ was.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of evidence that he actually existed, that he was an actual person who lived in first century Roman Judea, and that there's good reason to believe that he was crucified and buried under Pontius Pilate, that he ministered in Galilee and Jerusalem, throughout Judea, that his tomb was discovered empty by a group of his female followers, and that his believers sincerely believed that he rose from the dead. Now, notice that none of those claim those to be specific historical facts about the resurrection.
Right.
They're all kind of a minimal facts type approach.
Yeah.
These are the minimum facts that 99% of historians agree with, that they won't refute.
Right.
So, you don't have to memorize. I would memorize maybe those four basic facts.
Yeah.
But they're pretty simple,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
But you don't need to know every little date, name, detail, all of that stuff. I think just one or two examples is probably enough to turn the conversation.
Yeah, just to show that there is evidence, there's proof out there.
Yeah. And that might start them down their own path to find evidence and seek out evidence for themselves. But we don't want to overwhelm them
Right.
with the abundance of evidence, because that can be just as much of a turnoff as not answering the question in the first place.
Sure.
So what do we do with all this evidence? The question isn't, did Jesus exist? Historically, obviously the answer is yes. The question is, do you believe who he is and who he said he was? His life, his death, his resurrection. They are among some of the best attested facts of ancient history, with some of the best manuscript evidence out there. But that evidence, and I think Ryan would agree with me on this, won't save you. Remember, the goal of apologetics is not to prove a point. It is to point the person to Jesus Christ.
It's to remove barriers. Mm-hmm. And if this is one of somebody's barrier, then provide all that evidence. But at the end of the day, even historical facts can't save you. It's a personal relationship with Christ. Right. It's that relationship that we have with Jesus, and accepting his sacrifice for our sins.
Right. So if Jesus was who he says he was, and he is the Son of God, and he is the atoning sacrifice for sin, then that would lead me to believe that some of the claims that he made, specifically like I am the way, the truth, and the life, they probably carry a lot of weight.
Kind of a big deal.
And so I guess that's going to probably lead us into some future questions about, if he makes a statement of like, I am the truth, does that mean then that there are some things that perhaps maybe are not open for discussion, and some things that are not as relative as we'd like to make them appear?
Is truth relative? What do you think?
I don't think so, but maybe that's a discussion for another time.
I think so.
It's been nice hanging out with y'all. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.